Right, hi everybody. So I'm Paul from Pandaemonium Miniatures. I'm going to be taking you through the painting process for my Men-at-Arms unit from Conquest, The Last Argument of Kings by Para Bellum Wargames. The unit was sent to me by Para Bellum a week or so ago so that I could make some content with it, which I'm really grateful for. And you can see that I've painted the first 4 to give you an example of what the rest are going to look like. So to take you through it, I've first of all, on this back row, so I've prepped them by priming them black, and then I've base coated them with Vallejo metal colour steel. I did that through an airbrush. You get a nice even coat, it goes on really well. I've then shade washed that with a mixture of black and blue, so I used Nuln Oil and I used Drakenhof Night from GW. And then I gave them a very, very light brush with a makeup brush using Mithril Silver, just to catch the edges of all the armour plates. I didn't want to shine it up too much because I quite like that blackened steel look. So that's the prep work. So what I'm then going to do is add in all the base coating first of all, shade washing and highlights. So I'm using quite simple techniques, quite basic techniques. My emphasis really is to be neat and get a smart looking unit for the tabletop. So I'm going to pause it and I'll set up for painting, and I'll see you in just a sec. So all set up for painting. So I'm going to concentrate on 4 models for the purposes of this video. And the first thing I'm going to do is block in all of the dark red areas. So because I've got it to hand, I'm using Citadel Corn Red and put that on my wet palette, and I've thinned it a bit with some Water Plus from Instar. And all of the cloth areas and the insides of the shields are going to get a couple of thin coats of Corn Red now. And I'm using a size 3 brush, so it comes to a nice point, but it also means that I get quite quickly and quite evenly, I get decent coverage. Just thin it a little bit more so I've got a bit more of a flow to it. I'm not too worried about going over these metal rivets because I will retouch them in metal closer to the end. It's easier to paint over them and ensure an even coat than it is to try and paint around them, and then it all ends up a bit fiddly. So you can see the way I'm holding my brush, I've got my fingers very, very close to the bristles. Might not suit everybody. For me, it gives me quite a lot of control. I should point out that another thing that I did to prep was I actually gave all of the insides of the shields a coat of Vallejo chipping medium, and that's because I'm going to introduce some battle damage to the shields once the design is complete. So you can see that even though this is a pretty big brush, the fact that it comes to a very nice point and holds paint well in the belly means that I can be pretty accurate with my colour placing. And that's really what my main concern is right now, is being very neat and not getting the colour anywhere I don't want it, because that will have kind of ruined the point of me base coating the armour in the first place. I quite like these because they've got variation in their clothing. So this guy's got some kind of long overcoat, I suppose, tabard maybe, whereas everybody else is wearing slightly shorter clothes, and they might have armour plating on their chests rather than cloth. So although they're clearly a unified unit, they're not uniform, which I quite like. Anyway, so you get the idea. So that's the first coat. It's going to need 2 thin coats just to ensure good coverage over the metal, get a nice solid base coat. So I'm going to carry on and repeat the process on all 4 with 2 coats, and then I'll pause, rejoin once I've completed that stage. Cool. So that's all the red areas base coated. They've had 2 thin coats, and that's given quite a nice even coverage there. So you can see I've tried to be quite systematic with this. I've kept the shields separate. I've pinned them to the corks so I can paint them alongside the actual figures, and then I've drilled a hole into the wrists of each of the figures so that I can just super glue the shields in place once it's all done. So next stage I'm going to do is all of the leather work. So we've got the straps, we've got the belts, gloves, and then all the areas of cloth that are underneath the armour. And I'm going to pick those out in Rhinox hide. In the same stage, I'm also going to paint the bases in Dryad bark to match the rest of the force, and I might as well pick out the faces as well. It's quite good when you're batch painting to have a think about the areas which aren't going to be touching one another, and you can complete those in the same stage without the risk of any of the paint running. So yeah, so I'll pick out the faces as well. So we'll start off, let's see, let's start with this one. Oops. So I'm using a size 2 brush now. I've just switched down a size, just gives me a little bit more control. And rather than trying to paint the length of the strap in one long stroke, I'm taking it steady with quite short strokes. You're less likely to slip that way. Just in underneath, because it's quite a thick strap, it's got some depth to it. So I just need to get that line of brown in. And then we've got the belt coming in here. And the end of the belt trails down I'm not too worried about painting over the buckle at this point because I'll pick that out a bit later. So you can see I've mounted all the models to corks. I just use them because they're readily available. I mean, I've got a brewing supply shop quite near me, so I can pick them up in packs of 10. And I haven't really got a proper painting handle. It might be nice, but actually because I paint so many models, you know, it's more practical to mount them all on corks rather than buy a load of paint handles, because I never know how many I'm going to need at any one time. I tend to have, I think I've got about 50 corks. I mean, the most I will be batch painting at any one time is probably 20. Done 30 before now, and it kind of does your head in a bit. So you've got areas of cloth that are behind the armour plates here. So I'm picking them out in brown as well. Just being careful to stop at the point where the boot comes in and not going over the edges. And just under the tunic there. And then lastly, you've got the gloves, because they definitely look like they're leather gloves rather than plated ones. So we'll treat them as leather. And then you've got all of the strapping and the cloth under the arms armour, which can all be brown. There we go. So just like with the red, I'm going to give all of that a couple of coats. So I'll pause again, I'll do all 4 and then rejoin you for the next stage. So that's all the belts and straps, the gloves, etc. done in Rhinox hide, and then I've also painted the bases and the faces of the 2 that have got exposed skin. So next stage is, there's a few details that I want to pick out in gold. So the sword hilts, the pommels and the belt buckles. So I'm going to be using Retributor armour for that. And I'm using a synthetic brush. I prefer using synthetic brushes, or at the very least an older brush for metallics, because they're just a bit harsher on the bristles, and some of them in particular, you know, the metal fragments in the paint can kind of shred a sable brush, whereas a synthetic's a little bit tougher. it's got a little metal tab at the end of the belt, so I'm going to pick that out in gold as well. There we are. So I'm going to do that for all of them, and then I'll come back to you shortly. So all of the gold details has had a couple of coats of Retributor armour now, so it's got a nice sort of even coating of that yellowish gold. So now what I'm going to do is do some shade washing, and I'm going to shade wash all of the cloth, the belts and the gold all together, and I'm going to be using a purple wash for that. I'm going to be using Drukai Violet. So I like using purple wash over a few different colours. It works really well for the reds, makes it nice, deep and rich. Works well for browns, gives a more interesting tone than, say, if you base coat, if you shaded it with black or with brown. And it works beautifully over the gold. It gives it a kind of an antique sort of a look. I also like using it over green because it's the opposite end of the colour spectrum, on the colour wheel rather. It's the complementary shade, and so shading the green with it gives you a really nice contrast. So I'll just give that a bit of a shake up, and I'll put it in my stand. So I've got a couple of these stands for wash pots to stop them from tipping over and resulting in that spillage that you always see on social media. These are from Hellforge Props. She is on Etsy, and I really recommend her. So these were 3D printed, and she sold me the actual thing. She also sells the STL file, so that you can print as many as you want at home. So I'm using a size 3 brush, and I'm going to firstly shade the red on the shields, and really what I want is, in the end result, is all of the edges on the inside edge of the metal trim to be shaded in the end, and then all of the cloth and the belts are all shaded together. So you can see that that little bit of forward planning, knowing what my scheme was going to be and how I was going to treat everything, means that I can be quite pragmatic and save myself a bit of time. You know, if I hadn't have really planned it, I'd have probably ended up shading each individual colour, and it would have taken a lot longer. So over the gold as well. So it really transforms the gold. I really like that effect. So you can see, even when I'm shade washing, I'm being quite controlled with the brush. I've got my fingers very close to the bristles, short strokes, and I'm concentrating on not flooding the figure with the wash. I don't want it to run over and pool too much. There we go. Let's get it into the trousers there. Great. So, oh, and his face. So I'm going to do that for all four, and then I'll come back to you once all the washes have dried. I tend to give an hour, but actually because it's such a warm day, all week it's been warm, I've been finding that washes have been taking about half the time to dry. So I'll see you shortly. Well, that actually didn't take very long at all. That was only 20 minutes for the shade washes to dry. Just shows how warm it is. So the next stages are, I'm going to pick out the eyes at this point. So when I did the purple shade wash just now, I also took the opportunity to use some Reichland Flesh Shade to shade the skin on this guy. So I've got two which have got exposed faces. So I'm going to pick out the eyes now. I prefer to do the eyes at an early stage because it takes a little bit of the pressure away. If it goes wrong now, it's very easy to correct. Whereas if I left them at the last minute, I could potentially ruin all the work that I've done on the face. So I'm using Instar Pure White, which is a very nice smooth white, quite thin but covers very well. Been very impressed with it. I'm using quite a small brush. This is a 10/0 brush. And I'm just going to get the excess paint off just onto my thumb there. And I'm going to go this side first. And just pick out the eye. Get a little bit more paint on. And what I tend to do is turn the model completely upside down to do the other side. Because I'm right-handed, it means it's tricky for me to get right into the corner nearest the nose if it's the other way up. There we are. So the eyes are blocked in. They're pretty even. Any unevenness I'll correct at the next stage. So I'll just do this guy. Yep. And again, turn upside down, do the other side. Like that. Good. And then what I'll do is for the guy with the darker skin, I use a bit of black. I could use any black. I happen to have this one to hand. It's Instar Pure Black. And I'm just going to go around the top and the bottom of the eye to define the shape and to even up the sizes so that he's not staring, basically. There we are. And then on the other guy, I'm going to use the Rhinox hide that I used for the belts, etc. Thin it down a bit more. See what that looks like. Yeah, that's pretty good. And again, just going to go top and bottom, just under the shadow of the eyebrow, really. And then underneath. Then I'm going to dot in the pupils, so I'll use that black again. Get a nice thin point on the brush, and this is where it's particularly useful to have your fingers very near the tip of the brush. You get really good control. So dot in one pupil and the other, just check that they're both facing the same way. And again, you know, if you don't get that right, it doesn't matter. You know, it really doesn't matter. People get very nervous about eyes. Comes with practice, obviously, but like, there we are, looking good. If you're really not confident with using a brush to do the pupils, another method you could do, and I use it, is to use a fine liner pen. I use a 0.05 fine liner, and that's a blessing, particularly if you're batch painting, you know, a unit of 12 in one go, and you're doing, and you want to do all the eyes. Well, you know, it just takes the guesswork out, it takes the stress out, so it's much better. So okay, so the eyes are done. So the next step is I'm going to be picking out the cloth areas that I want to be cream coloured. So if you remember on the original ones I did, I've gone for bands of cream coloured cloth, and then I've also picked out a heraldic design on the shield using that cream. And what I've tried to do is for every single man-at-arms, I've given them individual heraldry, but still within the same colour scheme. So I'm going to try doing that. Now, it's very easy to find heraldic devices online. There's plenty of visual material, source material, to find that sort of thing. But there's basic designs. So there's that quartered design I just showed you, half and half, and that's either horizontal or vertical. You can have a diagonal stripe across. You can have a chevron. So there's quite a lot of variation. You know, you can have stripes, jags, checks, diamonds. So I'm trying to create variety, so they each have their own identity despite being part of one unit. So I've thinned down some Zandri dust, which is a really good base colour for all sorts of things like what I'm doing, but also skulls, bones, scrolls, pages of books, things like that. So I'm going to paint every other strip of cloth on that front piece there in the cream colour. I'm using a size 2 here. Let's get a point. And I'm going to turn the model upside down just so that takes away the possibility that I'll go over the edge there. There we are. I mean, that's just one coat, but it's pretty solid already. I'll give it 2. Really does cover well, this paint. Now in terms of heraldry for this one, I think I might give him a chevron on his shield. So that's just going to involve a bit of simple freehand work really. Cool. So yeah, so Chevron Design. So luckily these shields, because they've got rivets around the outside, it makes it relatively straightforward to plot out where the center is. So if I draw an imaginary line from that top rivet down to level with the second row of inside rivets to there, and then another dot on the next row of rivets, that will tell me that's the thickness of stripe that I want, and then I want the angle to come down to be just above that rivet. So if I just tilt it so that I can get a line down, there we go, and then the same the other side. I'm not too worried about getting all the way to the edge, because if I try that too much, I'll end up clashing with the edge. So I'll turn the whole thing upside down to get that bottom corner, and then similarly I want to run a parallel line straight as possible down to there and here as well. Yeah. So let's do what I said I'd do, and just turn it upside down just so I can get into the edge there. And while I'm there, then I'll block in the inside. Get into that little annoying corner bit. There we are. Okay, so I've just veered into the red there a little bit, but that's very easily corrected. So the thing is not to be too nervous about stuff like that. Freehand, you know, quite often you see this very impressive looking freehand on a lot of people's work, but oftentimes it starts out really rough, and it's almost like an exercise in self-belief, in faith, to kind of be confident that what you get at the beginning is really a foundation stage for the end result. There we go. So that's sorted that out. And I might want to just sharpen up that point actually at the top while I'm there. Yeah, good. Once that's dried, I'll give it a second layer, and then that'll really even it out. What I'm tempted to do actually, because he's got his long coat, is actually repeat that chevron design on the coat. So I'll do that. So I'm going to do this process for all of them, and I'm going to create individual heraldry on all the shields. So I'll meet you after the pause to show you the results of that. Okay, so at this point I have given all of the cream areas 2 coats, and I've blocked in the basic design for the heraldry. So this one's got a chevron, and as I said I would, I've repeated the chevron onto the coat as well. This one I've given it a kind of crenellated, castellated sort of design. This is a chevron as well, but just a split field. And then I've given that one a diagonal stripe going in the opposite direction to one that I did before. So all individual. It's possible to create a good variety of designs even just using the same basic colours. So the next stage is to shade all of those areas, and I'm going to be using Seraphim Sepia for that. Go and have a rummage and find it. There it is. So again, I'll sit it in the pot holder so it doesn't go anywhere. So I'm aiming to be pretty careful with this. I'm going to use a size 2 brush rather than a size 3. It doesn't matter overly if it does bleed over onto the red, to be honest. It's not going to show particularly. So making sure it just gets into the shade, into the recesses really. Creating a bit of depth. And I'll just play a thin amount over the top of the shield as well. And then onto the cloth here, and create some nice shadow. Cool. So that's not going to take me very long. I'll get the rest done, and then once that's dry, which again should be about 20 minutes, we'll move on to the next stage. So with those shade washes dry, that's really the end of the basic stage of painting. That's like the foundation of it all. So we now move on to building up highlights. So what I'm going to do to begin with is retouch all of the red and the cream areas in the base colours again, but avoiding the recesses. So I'm going to keep it on broadly the more raised areas. So we'll start with the red, going in with the size 2 brush. And what we're doing really is just brightening things up a little, keeping the richness, and you can see that I'm focusing on the middle part of the bands of colour here. Not going all the way down to the edge where it meets the cream, but maintaining a band of shade just to give some definition. And where you've got folds of cloth, I'm running it along the tops of each fold and maintaining the shadow in the recesses. So what that is also doing is any mottling that's left over from the shade wash, that's sort of eliminated and evened out. So you end up with a nice flat basis for the highlights. So again, on the raised areas of the cloth, avoiding the shadows. Come down to there. create quite a thin band of shade just in between the cream and the red. I mean, another technique you could use there is maybe black or brown outlining, but doing it this way means you don't really need to do that. Good. And then on the shield, similar deal. It's effectively creating a barrier of shade between the red and the cream, just to keep the definition sharp, and avoiding the edges of the shield, keeping a bit of a line of shadow around where the rivets are, really. And you'll find that where the difference might seem when you're painting, it might seem a bit stark with the red, but actually once it dries, it blends in. It blends down quite nicely. Cool. So that's the first one done. I'll do the same thing on the others, and then I'll block in the cream colours as well. So I've now given all of the coloured areas a retouch of the base colours, and that's really solidified them all. The other thing that I've done is I've picked out the rivets on the shield, where there's 3 shields where the rivets are inside the colour fields. So I've just picked those out by base coating them black and then just touching them with silver just to make them nice and bright. So first stage of highlighting then is to mix a lighter shade using the base colour with a brighter shade of each colour. So for the red, I'm using a 50-50 mix of corn red, the original base colour, with Mephiston red, just to brighten it up a little bit. And for the cream areas, I've mixed in another colour, Ushabti bone, into the Zandri dust, again 50-50, just to brighten it up a little bit. So where I applied the base shade just now to raised areas, I'm applying to raised areas again, but a smaller area. So I want to keep the shade, and I want to keep the base colour kind of next to the shade, so I'm creating effectively bands of colour. So the highlighting stage is going to be in about 4 or 5 steps, really. So here I can make a band of the lighter colour there, maintaining an outline. I've also got up to about this point is where the fold of cloth is, so I want to keep that as straight as possible. I want to avoid that recess. And paint onto this fold. And avoid that recess, paint onto that fold. And then get a nice smooth edge there. There we are. And then on the chevron, I'm sort of focusing towards the middle of the chevron, maintaining a band of the shade colour on the outermost edges, just to sharpen up the definition. There we are. Cool. I'll just clean my brush and then I'll do the red on this one as well, just so you can see. So you've got that band, almost like a thick hem really, probably padded. There we are. And then you see I can be quite sparing at this point. The areas of colour that I am working on become smaller and smaller as the highlight process continues. So where I painted the raised areas just now, I'm really trying to get as fine a line as possible with the lighter shade, and then I'll go finer again for the next couple of stages. So I'm keeping a shadow just where it's starting to creep towards the belt. So you'll notice that, you know, I'm going at this fairly quickly. I mean, I guess it just comes with practice. It's just like I've got brush control pretty good nowadays, so it does mean that I can be more confident with what I'm doing. Yeah, good. So you can see that although it appeared to be quite a bright, stark contrast as it was going on, where it's dried on the front of the model, it's dried already, you can see that that's blended back in, and it's kind of dulled down a little bit more. So it's good, you know, it's good to know how the paint behaves. So I'm not going in at all where the rivets are. I'm keeping that area relatively shady. I'm just focusing on the centre. Cool. So I'm going to repeat the process for all of them, and then I'll come back for the next stage. Okay, and then the next highlight stage is going to be just using pure Mephiston red for the reds, pure Ushabti bone for the creams. I'll start with the creams first for a change. So here we're going even finer and creating a line of highlight like that. Just touching it to the raised areas of cloth just a little, like that. For the shields, I'm not going to highlight the whole thing with Ushabti bone. I'm going to create what I suppose is a little bit of an artificial highlight. And I'm going to get my brush as fine as possible, and I'm just going to trace a fine line on the inside edge of the shape, just to increase the definition, like that. And the reds, so similar deal on the shield, where I'll just do a fine line like that, and then get a highlight on that hem, and then a line of highlight on the pleats, and then you've got a bit of a hem on the overcoat bit there. You've also got a bit of an edge there. So where I'm hitting the edges, I'm doing that with the kind of the side, to just off the tip, and then that helps me create a nice fine line. And then I've got the folds of the cloth to deal with, so again just going in quite fine with those. And here as well. Like that. So I'll do all of those, come back for the next stage, of course. So that's done on all four now. So this is the penultimate stage of the highlights. So in order to do that, I have mixed into the Mephiston red Fire Dragon Bright, really bright orange. It looks a little bit extreme, but actually a little bit like all the other shades of red, it will start to blend down once it's drying. And then into the Ushabti bone, I'm just put some pure white, Instar Pure White. I mean, I tend to use Instar for this, well, for all painting, because the white, it's the nicest, smoothest white I've used. It doesn't go all lumpy like some of them do. So start off with the bone then, and I'm going to retrace the lines I made on the shields. and then create as fine as possible a line of highlight on the pleats. And then on the cloth, you can see that there's ridges of the folds, and I really want to just concentrate on those. Yeah, simple as that, you know, it's a very quick thing. So I'll do that on all of them. The red's in a similar way. So the 50-50 red and Fire Dragon Bright mix looks like this. So, you know, kind of a deepish orange, I suppose. So again, I'm going to trace that in a line. Along the pattern. Like that. And then using this just behind the tip of the brush, just to draw it along the edge of that hem, so I keep some shade along it, but then I'm highlighting the bottom edge, and then I do a focused highlight along that hem, same there, and then just carefully pick out the highlights of the folds of the cloth. And then go along that bottom edge of the robe as well. Like that. And you can see there's a division where you would get the biggest highlight, the brightest highlight on this cloth, and it's where it starts to billow out here. So I'm effectively going to emphasize that volume by doing that. Now I've done it thin enough that I don't really need to glaze or feather back in, but if I'd gone a bit stark with it, I would have needed to have gone in with the darker shade and just feathered it in a bit. Cool. So I'll do that on all four and rejoin you for the final stage of highlighting. For the final stage of highlighting, that's using very, very sparingly pure Fire Dragon Bright and pure white. Now, like, arguably for rank and file, particularly for tabletop standard, I've probably gone, you know, two stages up from what a lot of people would do, but I just like to get things to a particular level. So it's very sparing, and I'm not going to go onto the shields at all with the pure orange. That would just be a bit much. So all I'm going to do with that is re-emphasize that highlight, and I've just gone for the front. I've left the outermost edges, and then you can see that although it went on quite harsh, as it's drying it blends in a little bit more. So I'm just going to run that very, very carefully along the tops of the folds of cloth there, along this edge like that, along that edge. Same with the folds of cloth at the back, and just a little on the bottom edges. And that's it. And then with the pure white, again, not going to touch the shield with it. I'm just touching a tiny amount to the top halves of those pleats, to the edge of that chevron, and the back edge. So very quick, but it just, you know, creates that extra level of highlight. So we'll do all four, do the three that are left, sorry, and then there's just a few final touches. So I'll explain those shortly. So that was pretty quick. So the next bit is I've got a couple of faces to highlight. So the guy with the lighter skin, I gave him a base coat in the first place of Bugman's Glow, and then shaded it with Reichland Flesh Shade. So now I'm going to go reapply some Bugman's Glow. Concentrating on the raised areas and really only the nose and the cheeks. And then the upper lip. I mean, those are the things that are visible anyway, and just the brow. And that just evens it out a little bit. For the guy with the darker skin, I've mixed in some Bugman's Glow into the Rhinox hide for a first highlight. And again, I'm applying that to the cheeks and the nose and the brow and the upper lip, just on the raised areas. So I'll let that dry. It won't take very long at all because it's just so hot. So then I'm going to mix in some Kislev flesh into the Bugman's Glow, 50-50. And on the brow, the bridge of the nose, the very tip of the upper lip, and the cheekbones. For the other chap, I'm going to mix in a bit more Bugman's Glow into the brown. Kind of graduating the highlights a little bit more, because if I go into sort of stark stages, it will look a bit weird. Okay. Then for the other chap, it's just going to be pure Kislev flesh. we go. At this stage now, I can use very sparingly some pure Bugman's Glow. And then that'll do for the highlights here. And in this case, I'm just going to use that on the tip of the bridge of the nose and the cheekbones. And then I'll just do one last highlight on this guy, and I'll just mix some white into the Kislev flesh and concentrate on the tip of the bridge of the nose and try and get the cheekbones fairly sharp, and that'll do. What I might do is just to bring back the contrast between the skin and the helmet, is just give it a very thin line of black across the top of the brow and the inside edge of the chin shield there. There we go. See if I need to do that with him as well. Yeah, probably would benefit from it. It's not quite as bad though. There we are. Cool. So now I can highlight the gold. So I'm going to use Liberator Armor Gold. Which is a sort of a paler gold than the Retributor armor. Because it's metallic, again I'm going to use a synthetic brush, but I'm going to use a tiny one. And I'm concentrating here on the outermost parts of the sword hilt and pommel, and the raised areas of the belt buckle and the end of the belt there. Yeah. What I then do to further highlight gold is I use silver. So I'm using a little bit of Vallejo metal colour aluminium, which is a very bright silver, and that's just going to go on the corners of the hilt and that little ridge on the pommel, the most raised bits of the belt buckle and the very bottom edge of that one. And then I'm also, just to make sure I haven't got too much paint on so it doesn't flood it, I'm just going to run it carefully along the ridges of the sword there, just to give that a sharper highlight. There we are. And then that makes that a brighter steel than the armour, so you've got a bit of definition there. Got to be quite sparing with the Vallejo metal colours. They're brilliant, they cover really well, but they're a lot more liquid and free flowing than say Citadel paints are. What that means is that they go absolutely beautifully through an airbrush. They also brush on very well. You've just got to be aware that they flow quite well, so it's wise often to do any metallic work before you do any other work, because it's got that potential to be a bit messier, and that's partly why I prep the models by doing all the metals or all the armour in one base coat first. Cool. We're very nearly there. So the one last thing I want to do before I reattach the shields is highlighting all the leather work. So that's just going to be 2 simple stages. So first of all, I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of Mournfan Brown with the original Rhinox hide. And then with the number 2 brush, I'm just going to run that mix, just thin it down a little bit more. Along the surface of the frontmost part of that strap, along the surface of the more prominent areas of the belt. Let's just do the back as well. And then I'm going to highlight the knuckles on the gloves, and then also all of those straps there on his sleeve. Okay, so that's the first stage. The second stage is that 50-50 Sharp T-Bone and Zandri dust mix. I'm then going to blend that with some of the brown. And that creates that creates this sort of khaki mid-tone, and I want to get most of that off the brush just so that I can carefully edge my way along the strap like that. Oop. Now that's smeared a little, and that's no problem at all because I can just retouch it with that brown mix and they'll never know. So I'll just turn the model around so I can access the other side. That was clumsy, but again, doesn't actually matter. Because it's very easy to fix. Now, what I've seen people do, one little hack for particularly military modelers who are doing a lot of Napoleonics or whatever, what they'll do is they'll actually paint the entirety of the belt with the highlight colour and then paint the base colour into the inside so that they leave the outer edges highlighted, which is, you know, that's a good solution. Particularly if, you know, if you don't feel that you've got a steady enough hand for doing edges. But, you know, as I'm showing, even if you make a little mistake here and there, it's very easily rectified. So I'm also just going to carefully let's just get rid of some of that. I might need to tone it down a little for doing the knuckles because that seemed a bit stark. That's better. So I just mixed a little bit more brown into the mix just so it wasn't quite so glaring. There we are. I'll do the back. There we are. So I'll just pause while I do the other three. So that's it from the painting point of view. So I'm just going to put the paints away, and then the next thing I need to do is trim down the wire pins on the shields and then super glue the shields onto the bodies, and then I'm going to do the battle damage on the shields. So I'll just pause while I clear up and then I'll talk you through that. Here we go. So I've got some cutters to trim down the wire, and it's just a case of detaching the shields from the cork. And then cutting the wire down quite short because the hole in the arm isn't drilled all the way in, so I really just want a way of just plugging it in. Okay, so let's just test whether that's short enough. Could be a bit shorter, so let's clip it down a bit more. Good. Then it's just a case of a little dab of super glue. Onto the wire and onto the ridge on the shield where it will meet the arm. And then I'm just putting my finger behind the hand to brace it. And then I pop it in place. And then put it to one side to set. So I'm going to do that for all of them, and then we'll move on to the battle damage. So hopefully you recall that I mentioned that when they were still at the metallic stage, I prepped the shields by giving the inside of the shield a coat of Vallejo chipping medium. Okay, now if you've not used this before, it's really cool stuff. So the best way to do it is to base coat your figure. In this case I've done it metallic, but you know, you could use a darker colour. Paint the figure as normal, and then you can then reactivate the chipping medium. And the way that you do that is you use water. So I'm just going to use an old brush, and you get the area that you're weathering quite wet. Now I'm going to be quite choosy. I've spent some time creating these heraldic designs, and whereas I want some damage, I don't want to totally obliterate what I've done. So you wet the area, and then I'm just using a sharpened little bit of cocktail stick, and I'm just going to gently scratch it across the surface, and you can see that it totally lifts off all of the paint, but leaves the metallic paint that was underneath it. So I'm going to create, and you notice that it stops at the point where there's no water. So I want to extend that down a little bit. I would go with the less is more rule with this, to be honest. There we are. And in order to kind of deactivate it again, I'm going to carefully just dab at it with some kitchen towel. I don't want to rub it, because that will pull away more paint than I want. Okay, so that's looking quite good, and then I can just reassess. I maybe want to make that scratch a little bit more prominent, so I'll just work into that a little bit more. And again, just dab the water away. And then there's a few dried flicks of paint, so by that point I can just rub them away. Nice. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that process for the other shields. I mean, I'm not sure whether I might leave one or two, or maybe one of them with no damage at all, just for a bit of variation. But it does make them look like they've actually been in a battle. So I did actually do all of them, but quite sparingly. So you know, that's just got the one scratch. Same there. It just makes them look as though they've been smashed about a bit. Really adds a bit of character to them. So the very final thing then is basing. So I've already painted the bases the brown colour, and I don't really need to apply any kind of texture because they're going to be completely covered. So what I've got to apply to them first of all are some tufts from Rival Crafts. I've got some blue flowers, I've got some grass. So I'm just going to do a tuft of grass each and a flower each on the bases. I'm sure you've probably used these before. They're really easy. They're self-adhesive, they pop off, put them where you want them, and then what I do is use a cocktail stick to just tamp it into place. Put that one at the back. One there by his feet. Oops, sorry. And then some flowers. Maybe I'll put more flowers on him actually. They look quite nice when they're all bunched up. Oof. I am sorry, I keep knocking you over. There we are. Let's pop round the back as well. Cool, there we are. Let's pop those away. Let's get some more grass soon actually, start to run out of those. Then what I'm going to do is cover the base in leaf litter. Now what I've got for that are birch seeds, and I bought these from Fenris Games. So they're dried birch seed pods, and they are the shape of and the colour of dried autumn leaves, and they look really nice. So I'm going to need to detach them from the corks. Firstly, just get the little bits of flowers off my fingers so I don't get them all over the model. So a little gentle twist, so you can see that the only thing I was using for attaching these is blue tack, or poster putty as you might call it generically. So then in order to get the leaf litter on, it's a case of coating the base with PVA and then just dipping them into the leaf litter. So let me just use a scrap bit of kitchen towel, I think, to put the glue into. It saves me getting any containers dirty. There we are. Yeah, so I'm going to use an old brush and then carefully apply the PVA glue around the feet and on all of the surface of the base and around the tufts. shuffle those up to the end there a bit, just gently. And then it's just a case of putting him down into the bottom of the container, putting my finger on his head to hold him steady, and then giving the pot a gentle shake so that I get a good even coating of leaves all over the base. And then just tapping the base against the edge just to disturb the loose excess leaves. And then putting them to one side to dry. And then what I'll need to do is, once that's dry, I'll give it another quick tap and a shake to take off the excess leaves that haven't stuck to anything. So I'll do with the other three, and then you can have a final look at the finished result. All right, so here are the finished figures, and I've given them a coat of varnish, which is important anyway for protecting them, but an extra reason for doing so is the chipping medium. It just seals that in, makes sure it doesn't get reactivated and doesn't cause any further damage to the paintwork. So yeah, pretty happy with them. And there they are together with the previous four. So they're starting to look like a really quite coherent unit now. And while the shade washes were drying earlier, I also did some work on the other four. So they're like this. I've got pretty much most of the base coat stage done. So I did the reds, the golds and the browns. So I would have thought I'd be able to finish them off over the next couple of days. So that's that. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll put some links in for some of the things I recommended during the course of the video. And if you've got any questions, do put them in comments. Do hit the like button, and if you want to subscribe, then do subscribe. Thank you very much.